And a happy Tuesday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Boy, has it been chilly so far to start off your Tuesday morning, but now that we're transitioning into the afternoon, we do have some good news in terms of some of your freeze alerts and some of those very cold temperatures. We take a look at our cold weather alerts where we did see them widespread all across the state of Georgia earlier this morning. At 10 a.m. this was allowed to expire here in Central Georgia. We're still very likely going to see some temperatures within the threshold of that freeze or that frost warning in southern Georgia, but that's the Tallahassee offices, the National Weather Service, that is, the Tallahassee offices viewing area. So of course they will take the reins with that in terms of issuing another one, maybe extending this one, or maybe they're just holding on to some temperatures in that threshold here as we transition into the 11 a.m. hour. So now we do have an end to our weather impact alert as it stands here in Central Georgia. And the first freeze, it did officially occur. I think we first got below that 32-degree mark just before midnight as of last night. So our first freeze on average, typically around this date, November 11th. I guess technically we fell into the category of November 10th when those temperatures first got below freezing. But nonetheless, this has been the time frame we've been looking out for. The overnight hours last night into early this past morning. And now we are going to continue and maybe see some temperatures around freezing temperature over the next couple of days. But now that we've officially hit hard freeze criteria, it has put an end to the growing season. So these frost and freeze alerts are looking to be no more across many counties. So the freeze warning until 10 a.m. that was your main headline earlier today. The days will continue to get warmer, and they're going to get warmer fairly quickly after we get out of today, but we still will be near freezing temperature tomorrow. We'll go over the latest in terms of what we're forecasting for your morning lows as you make your way out and about tomorrow morning. But nothing but blue sky all across Central Georgia, maybe a few high-level clouds that you can get a glimpse of looking up to the north and the northeast over downtown Macon. And it continues to be a very dry environment. So very thankfully, we didn't have many puddles or things that were lingering all across our area from some previous rainfall. I imagine if we did have some areas that were doing that, that was northern Central Georgia, some of those areas that caught that severe thunderstorm warning this past weekend. And here's an updated look at your temperatures. This is what our morning lows have been sitting at for the last couple of days. So we've already had about 3 hours of a warming trend, and most of your numbers still in the lower half of the 40s. 44 looks to be the warmest number I can spot on this temperature map, but it's not necessarily a story of those actual numbers. We do have to factor in the winds. But just giving you an idea about how potent and how profound that this cold front that sweep through is, look at all of this blue in the eastern United States. 33 up in Lexington, still sub-freezing up in Indianapolis. Temperatures up to the northeast of us. Charlotte, Virginia Beach, Washington, still at 40 degrees. Even areas down in Florida, 47 degrees in Jacksonville, 48 degrees down in Orlando. It looks like areas like Miami, West Palm Beach, the Keys are going to be the only areas holding on to some semi-warm temperatures down in the very southern tip of the Florida Peninsula. But this cold stretch and this cold snap did not span as far west to areas like Oklahoma, getting into areas of Texas. They saw some colder temperatures. However, those numbers have already warmed back up into the mid-50s, even somewhere in the 60s in areas like San Angelo, Laredo, and over to Houston. 64 degrees, I do believe, is one of the warmest numbers that we do see. But in fact, we can spot an area that we never thought we would really talk about as having the warmest temperature here at this hour. 64 degrees, matching the warmest number down in Houston. That's up in Denver, Colorado. So yes, it is quite an untypical or atypical stretch of some very cold weather. And also a very dry environment after the passage of this front. Dew point temperatures in the mid to upper teens. It's been a while since we've seen some numbers just about this low, but of course those numbers do have to be below what your actual temperatures are, and they've been sitting there for quite some time earlier this morning. So it does look like we have some sort of what we like to call a vorticity max down here in the south and the southeast. That's why you do see these winds going outward kind of from a center, which is down here over into southern Alabama. But in fact, this is actually establishing itself as a high pressure center. So notice how the winds are going in the clockwise direction as opposed to the counterclockwise direction that we normally do see. But of course, we'll talk about that on the surface map. Right now, what we use this map for is to get a good view of the humidity levels in the southeast, and there is nothing but dry air in the state of Georgia and going over to the west into Alabama, Mississippi, all the way down to Florida. I can't spot any faint areas of that light green color whatsoever. And your winds and your wind gusts right now. We're still holding on to a bit of a widespread light breeze, but we can have some occasional gusts that are still up to around 18, maybe even 21 miles per hour. As we go throughout the rest of today, this breeze will steadily subside, but it is still making temperatures feel like somewhere in the mid to upper 30s, maybe right there around the 40-degree mark. 33 is the lowest we can spot down in Eastman and all the way up into Sparta. So that's been the story all morning long. We had feels like temperatures that got as low as 17 and 18 degrees earlier this morning, but all of the feels like numbers are now back above that freezing temperature mark of 32 degrees. So let's go over some numbers and kind of give you an idea about how unlikely getting a cold snap like this late in the fall season, this much before we even get into winter is. Well, yesterday's almanac, our confirmed low temperature was 29 degrees, so you will see that matches the record low back in 1923, and I believe we did this one other year back in 1967. But we didn't hit that low temperature in the early morning hours yesterday. We were still somewhere in the upper 30s, near 40 degrees to start out yesterday morning. We actually hit that 29-degree mark right before the midnight hour. So giving you an idea about how quickly we cooled down as we went into the hours past sunset yesterday. 50 degrees was your high temperature, but it definitely did not feel like 50 degrees. I know with those gusty winds and that wind advisory present, even some occasional gusts up to 30 and 35 miles per hour. The wind chills were somewhere in the upper 30s to the low 40s. So those numbers don't really tell the full story of your forecast yesterday. But taking a look at your averages, 71 for a high temperature yesterday. We were 21 degrees below the actual average high temperature, and your feels like numbers were probably getting into the territory of 30 degrees below average. 44 your morning low temperature yesterday on average, and we were running about 15 degrees below that threshold as we went into the nighttime hours. So your record high, 81 degrees back in 1980. Definitely a very warm day, but obviously we've seen our fair share of days maybe start to flirt with the low 80s, maybe even the mid 80s as of last week. So we didn't see any numbers that really got above that. 29, that record low, we just mentioned that, but it has been a dry stretch at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. We did get some occasional showers and even a couple of thunderstorms this past weekend. None of those recorded rainfall at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. And yesterday added another day where we didn't get any rainfall totals. So your year departure actually pretty close to about 1.5 inches above where we should be at this point in the calendar year. This number was somewhere around 7 or 8 inches above average about where we should be in the calendar year before we started undergoing that dry stretch into the month of September and October, and now we are carrying it over into the month of November. Sunrise was yesterday at 7 a.m. flat, so sunrise continues to get later and later, and that sunset will actually continue to get a little bit earlier. We still have a sunset that is going to be about 10 minutes earlier than yesterday's as we go into the next couple of months. So how about the records? I did mention some of those records that we were flirting with yesterday. Your record low temperature, we just hit it at a bit of an uncharacteristic time yesterday because we're so used to seeing the low temperature somewhere around the 6 to 7 a.m. hours as we now have the time change, so it's a little bit earlier than what we used to see. But your record lowest high temperature, so the lowest the high temperature has ever been on yesterday's date, back in 1913, that was actually what we had in terms of another cold snap just over 100 years ago. We recorded a high temperature yesterday of 50 degrees. It's a bit of a tongue twister right there. You're so used to saying low and highs and morning lows and afternoon highs, but the afternoon high yesterday was 1 degree above what the record lowest high temperature yesterday was. So now going into today's almanac, your record low temperature also back in 1913 of 26 degrees. We had some 25s pop up on our observation station this morning in the Macon area. We're going to wait and see what happens with that as we go into the afternoon and see if that value was confirmed. We had quite a few 25s on there, so it does make me semi-confident that we'll actually break the record low temperature for today all time, and obviously not even going to sniff that record high temperature of 86 that we hit just about 5 years ago back in 2020. So 70 degrees, your average high, and your average low, 43 degrees. We saw both of those numbers go down a degree between yesterday and today. So let's see how the hour-by-hour warming trend will go for the rest of your Tuesday. Eventually up in the 50s by about 2 p.m., topping out around 52 degrees, and then we will begin the cool down back into the 40s very quickly. So it's going to be another chilly night here in central Georgia. But first things first, 52 for a high temperature after a blistering cold morning. There is some relief in store as we head into the afternoon, and that's mainly in the form of your feels-like temperatures. Your feels-like temperatures are going to be a lot truer to this actual value of 52 as opposed to feeling maybe 10 degrees cooler that we did see yesterday afternoon. That is because the west northwesterly breeze is going to begin to fall apart as we head into around that 2, 3, and 4 o'clock time frame. But a little bit of relief, maybe feeling a little bit better than yesterday. We definitely would like to see a more substantial warm up as we go throughout the next couple of days. But before we talk about that, fire danger statement that has been issued because we continue to have dry fuel and a bit of a breeze present. So you can see that areas in North Georgia are not included in today's fire danger statement. It's actually just for West Georgia and going into the southern half, southern 2/3 of central Georgia. So our counties like Upson, going to Crawford, Bibb, going over to Twiggs, Wilkinson, and Johnson and Emmanuel counties kind of draw a line from those areas down towards the south. So you won't see areas like Monroe, Jasper, Putnam, Jones, Baldwin, Hancock, and Washington counties in this fire danger statement. If you are outlined in this, what this just means is avoid that controlled burning for the rest of today because we don't have much in the way of humidity. In fact, less than 25% is what your relative humidity is going to be later on this afternoon into the evening hours. We'll still have a steady breeze, but like I mentioned, that breeze is going to subside as we head into the evening hours, and then dry vegetation. We haven't had much in the way of rain, so you can bet that we do have a good amount of availability in terms of that dry vegetation that can allow for any fires that develop to spread very rapidly. And like I mentioned, today's just one of those days that outdoor burning is going to be discouraged, but we could welcome back another one of these as we go into tomorrow afternoon. For that, we're going to have to get a good look at the winds. Satellite and radar picture. There was some high-level cloud cover in our western counties this morning. All in all, it fizzled out very quickly, and it didn't do a good job of really even showing up visibility-wise. It was very thin, some of those high-level cirrus clouds that were still lingering in the forecast. And as we take a look around the southeast, it is still a very dry atmosphere, and that's because our frontal boundary is passed and not only ushered in drier air, but we've seen the center of high pressure slide over to the east behind this boundary that is way out in the Atlantic Ocean now. But like we were mentioning, it looked like areas down in southern Florida were the only ones holding on to some semi-warm temperatures, and that's because this front made its way all the way through the peninsula of Florida. So that cooler and drier air did funnel down a little bit farther south than we typically see with some of these frontal boundaries this time of year. And we see plenty of active weather back up here into the Great Lakes region of the country, where they're still expecting some snowfall of pretty substantial amounts around areas like Lake Erie, and of course getting up into the mid-Atlantic and New England portions of the country. Wouldn't even doubt that there's still some snow falling back into central Illinois, central Indiana, and going up into portions of Missouri. So here's a look at future view over the next 3 days. We'll zoom past it because there's not going to be much to talk about. It's just going to be a story of the numbers really as we go all the way through the midweek. So tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m., the one thing you will notice and why I put a pause point here is because these wind arrows, they are a bit longer and starting to get yellow in nature. So it does look like some gusty winds could build back into the forecast tomorrow afternoon, and then we'll start to see maybe some cloud cover of the higher level variety pass over during the nighttime hours, and then we go all the way into Thursday, where we once again have some on and off cloud cover, but all in all, it's not going to be indicative of anything besides a weak frontal boundary that is also going to pass through. What that's going to do is maybe just drop your morning low temperatures a handful of degrees as we go into your Friday morning. So we'll go over that with your numbers in just a moment. But let's talk about the winds. I did mention they are going to subside as we go into late this afternoon and the evening hours. That's where we see any shades of blue or any shades of yellow get out of the forecast entirely, but they will build back as we go into tomorrow morning and as we go into tomorrow afternoon. So you could expect some wind chill values that get a couple degrees below what the actual temperatures forecasted are tomorrow. And then we go all the way into Thursday, not much in the way of a breeze, and it does look like that takes us into the end of the work week on Friday. So let's factor in all those things we just talked about, the wind gusts, the temperatures, what they're going to be forecasted like. And this is going to give you a very good idea about what it feels like, those wind chill values as you head out the door at different times throughout the next 3 days. Later this afternoon, some green building back into the forecast map. Feels like numbers around 50 degrees, maybe still in the upper 40s. It's still going to be a chilly day, don't get me wrong, but we're always basing the weather on what we have been feeling like. So it's always relative to what, say, you felt like yesterday afternoon as you were making your way out of the office, heading home from work. Today is going to feel a little bit better, but we really don't get that relief until we go into tomorrow afternoon specifically. I did mention feels like numbers that could be a little bit cooler tomorrow if we have a bit of a light breeze present. So still dipping down into the upper 20s, maybe around 30 degrees as you walk out the door. And this is just what it feels like. These aren't your actual temperature values, but that will be very short-lived. Take a look at how much we warm up in between, say, yesterday afternoon and today, later this afternoon. Feels like numbers in the upper 60s, near 70 degrees. 70 degrees is your average high temperature this time of year. It looks like we are going to see a very quick warm up as we have a bit of a ridging pattern set up. So that's going to be under some high pressure, a bit of a heat dome set up, but obviously heat dome has more of a meaning when you're in the summer months, not necessarily the end of the fall and getting into the winter, but it will result in that very quick warm up of nearly about 15 to 20 degrees between your high temperatures later this afternoon and going into your Wednesday afternoon. And then Thursday morning, still very chilly. I guess this is very chilly by many of the past week standards. This is definitely substantially warmer than what we saw this morning, what we saw on Monday morning, but these numbers are still showing plenty of light blue, and that is translating into some very cool temperatures as you walk outside. 43 and 46 is what it feels like in Macon and down in Dublin as you walk out the door on Thursday. And then as we go into Thursday afternoon, we should finally see the return of the 70s, not only with your actual numbers, but also with your feels like numbers. Not going to have too much humidity that's going to have an influence on the feels like numbers. Remember, when they're very cold, the winds are what you look at in order to influence what it feels like, and that would make the temperatures feel colder than what they actually are. But as you go into the afternoons and you get numbers, say, somewhere in the 70s, you really need them to start to flirt with that 80-degree mark before any form of whatever humidity can start to make those numbers feel a little bit warmer. But we're not going to have much in the way of moisture in the atmosphere as we go throughout the next couple of days. But I did mention to you that we might see a little bit of a drop down into early Friday morning, back into the upper 30s for feels like temperatures, maybe somewhere in the low 40s. It's just going to result in maybe a high temperature about 3, maybe even 4 degrees cooler. And if we have a breeze present, once you get down into those 40s, it can result in some feels like numbers a few degrees cooler than what the numbers actually read. So over the next 3 days, 52 degrees for a high temperature today. That is definitely going to be the coolest that we will feel in the high temperature department each of the next 3 afternoons. Right there around freezing temperature for your actual morning lows tomorrow. That's what I went with in my forecast. That's definitely on the lower end of the range about what most models are calling for. I do believe that some areas will probably dip down to 32 degrees, could even get below freezing temperature once again, but I don't expect anyone to dip down into that hard freeze category, which is going to be 28 degrees or cooler. Some of the feels like numbers may flirt with that threshold, but overall, I do expect most of your numbers to be around 32 degrees, if not a couple degrees warmer as you walk out the door tomorrow. Then 68 degrees for a high temperature. That's pretty accurate of what the feels like numbers were as we went into the afternoon on that other graphic. And then we'll see the return of the 40s and the 70s, which is kind of textbook of the temperature range that we do see in the fall season as we go into Thursday. So your morning lows warm up pretty quickly. 24 for a morning low this morning. Like I said, the lowest I saw was 25, but that's still nearly a 20-degree temperature increase for your morning low temperatures. And that's only getting us back to average for this time of year. Your average low, 43 degrees, and we're going to hover around that range as we head into the end of the work week and the beginning of the weekend. But like I mentioned, that weak frontal boundary may be having a slight influence with some slightly cooler numbers as you walk out the door on Friday morning. 40 degrees for a morning low as opposed to 43, which we see on Thursday and on Saturday. And now let's go into the first freeze safety tips, because we're not anticipating anything in the more of those drastic impacts like we did see in terms of the hard freeze earlier this morning. But it's best to be safe than sorry when it does come to temperatures that are kind of close to that freezing temperature mark. Make sure first and foremost you're continuing to dress warm, and that really just goes for the rest of the work week until we can maybe see some morning low temperatures closer to the 50-degree mark. That feels a lot more pleasant. I know this says anticipated next Tuesday morning, but that date is today. We just haven't updated the criteria and the wording of that underneath your banner right there. So when spending time outdoors, just making sure that you have the puffer coat, maybe the beanie, maybe some form of a hand warmer, or utilizing the remote start on your cars before heading outside. That's what I did this morning. I started my truck up about 20 minutes before I actually made my way out on the roads. And bring your pets in for the night. If you have pets that like to hang out outdoors, enjoy some of the warmer temperatures in the afternoon, and just like to stay out there maybe in the nighttime hours when, of course, most of the calendar year, Central Georgia, we know, has some fairly warm nighttime temperatures, but they are a lot cooler than, say, the blistering hot afternoons. Just go ahead and bring those furry friends indoors for the night and continue to do so as we get into this cooler time of the year. Make sure you drain and disconnect outdoor hoses and faucets. I think we can kind of avoid getting away with this as of right now because, like I said, only a couple areas will get back to that freezing temperature mark, but always better to be safe than sorry. And wrapping any exposed pipes in any form of insulation, that's just going to be for maybe about a 3-hour window as we go into that morning low temperature time tomorrow. And make sure that you water your plants before freezing temperatures occur. So the best time to water those plants is going to be later this afternoon into the evening hours, specifically the afternoon. You want that water to try to evaporate a little bit. You don't want any standing puddles, say, in your flower pots that could freeze over. So, of course, making sure that you utilize all of these safety tips and kind of just tips and tricks to make your life a little bit easier, because the last thing you want to do is to have some form of crack in your hose or have some form of a pipe bursting. But we don't have to really worry about pipes bursting necessarily unless they're in those uninsulated areas for an extended period of time that we are below freezing temperature. You may remember Christmas about 2 or 3 years ago. We actually had our stretch of about 2 to maybe even 3 days where temperatures actually did not get above freezing temperature whatsoever. That's including your afternoon highs. That's where you really get into a time frame, an extended period of time below that 32-degree mark that can result in some pipe damaging. So I don't really think that's going to be a factor over the next couple of days. And your afternoon highs, if you are searching for some more comfortable feeling weather, we have just what the doctor ordered. That's already going to take place tomorrow afternoon. And believe it or not, we're back in the 70s over about the course of 48 hours from seeing some temperatures in the high temperature department that are nearly 20 degrees below average for this time of year, and will continue the increase into Friday and into Saturday. And these temperatures in the mid 70s, yes, they are warm compared to average of 70 degrees flat this time of year, but these are going to be some very pleasant feeling afternoons as we go into the near future. And in terms of your humidity, is it going to maybe see the return of dew point temperatures in the 50s or the 60s as we go throughout the next couple of days? This graphic doesn't really do too much in terms of helping us predict how much moisture is in the air this time of year, because take a look at your bullet point right here for Tuesday. We just saw widespread dew point temperatures in the mid to upper teens, and it still has us right in the middle of the 40s or less box. So I would believe that that point is way off your screen, way off in the bottom. It does look like we can see a general trend of maybe some more moisture in your forecast as we go into Sunday, but I don't really think that's going to correlate to any rain chances. Take a look at what your long-range models have to say about your extended forecast. Friday, nice and mostly clear as we go into the nighttime hours. First round of the state playoffs here in Central Georgia and all over the state of Georgia, looking like great weather for so. Now we go into Saturday afternoon all the way into the evening hours. Maybe some clouds just to the north of us. Nothing that's producing any rain, and that's going to be important because 7 o'clock, right around the time that the Dogs will be taking on the Texas Longhorns as we go into the tail end of college football season and one of the biggest games that Georgia does have left on the schedule. But if you have plans to maybe come back on Sunday, take your time. There's nothing in the way of rain that is going to impact you on your way back into town, and temperatures are still going to be mighty nice. Some above average high temperatures, and as we go into the end of the weekend, we should actually start to see some above average low temperatures for this time of year. Now let's go into Monday, where we finally see our next rainmaker possibly taking shape. But this is Monday at 7 p.m. If you heard me talking yesterday during the morning show, it looked like our next rain chance was going to be later Sunday into early Monday. Well, that rain chance is trending later and later. Pretty good agreement amongst the long-range models until we get into Tuesday about maybe this frontal boundary trying to trek into the south and the southeast. There's nothing definitive right now. Doesn't look like anything in the way of severe weather, but we'll continue to keep an eye on this as we are entering another calm stretch of weather. So that's going to be one of your major talking points over the near future. Now let's go into the tropics outlook. Obviously, nothing in the way of activity expected over the next 7 days. We haven't had activity since Hurricane Melissa about 2 weeks ago now, and it did move up into the North Atlantic. It did dissipate, and now that we're entering that cooler portion of the calendar year, the Atlantic Ocean waters are beginning their cool down along with the most other areas of the northern hemisphere. We can't even see anything on the satellite imagery about a tropical wave trying to get its act together off the west coast of Africa. And it does look like all these series of fronts that just continue to move through, they do act as blocking mechanisms, especially this one that's just moving off. It looks like the front is actually making its way over towards Bermuda now, over just off the east coast of the United States. So whatever does try to form, say maybe down in the Caribbean, like Melissa, where it got its act together, or in the Gulf, all of that is going to be steered back away from the United States just due to the guiding force with these frontal boundaries. But all in all, it's nothing to worry about. We're picking at straws, maybe trying to pick apart where the next tropical system could develop. I'm pretty confident that we could probably go into the rest of hurricane season without even seeing any areas of development, but it's something that we never take our eye off the ball with as we do head into the very end of hurricane season. And just seeing how active last year's was, we know that we really had to wait until that end date on November 30th before officially calling it quits. So we'll continue to keep you updated. If there's anything in the form of tropics that we do need to be concerned about, all in all, I think all you need to be concerned about is still going to be a bit of a chilly afternoon for the rest of your Tuesday. Wednesday morning also going to be a cold start, but then we get more and more pleasant as we go day by day. You'll have some above average high temperatures in the afternoons to compensate for the very brisk and raw and cold start to the work week that we did have. Brief cool down with your morning lows in between Thursday morning and Friday morning, but then we see a bounce back up. 40s and 70s, maybe even borderline 50s and 70s as you walk out the door on Sunday morning and transition into Sunday afternoon. And then if we get an increase in cloud cover on Monday, could keep the high temperatures a little bit below what you see on Saturday and Sunday, but we're still trying to fine tune that forecast as we get into the beginning of the work week. And something you can go ahead and look out for now that we're entering this calm and pretty pleasant stretch of weather for the remainder of the work week. Your average peak fall foliage, it's actually already occurring. Many of you have probably noticed on your daily drives that you can see those beautiful colors in all of the trees, but continue to look out through this time period, specifically right now until we get just on the cusp of Thanksgiving. This is typically when we see our peak fall foliage here in central Georgia, areas farther down in South Georgia, northern Florida. They see it typically right there around Thanksgiving as you transition into the month of November. But there are some beautiful fall colors all over the southeast at this time frame. And we've already seen peak fall foliage, say, up in the North Georgia mountains, which have been quite active over the last 24 to 36 hours with plenty of some snow, maybe even some accumulations up to 1 inch. I wouldn't even doubt that some areas in northern central Georgia saw a brief pocket of some flurries, nothing that did stick, but it was maybe of that frozen precipitation variety if your temperatures were, say, right there at 32 or even below the 32-degree mark. So that's something you can look out for. We'll get warmer and warmer as we go throughout the next couple of days, and nothing really to worry about in the way of impactful weather systems over the next couple of days. Just make sure that you're dressing warm as you go into this afternoon and especially tomorrow morning. Then your morning low temperatures will feel a little more comfortable to head out the door to, not as blistering cold, and you can get back into your daily normal routine. So that's going to do it for your extended forecast this Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back at 11 a.m. tomorrow to provide you with the latest update on what's going on weather-wise in central Georgia, and feel free to send in some fall foliage pictures. We're getting into a calm stretch of weather. Gonna have to find things to show, and I would love to showcase all the beautiful colors that you guys can see in your backyard and your front yards. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.